Good morning and welcome to the Flexible Space Association's latest Flex Generation webinar. I'm Jane Sartin, I'm Executive Director at Flexa, and we're joined today by Anastasia Edey, who is the Partnership and Growth Manager at TRC, and she's going to talk about building a career in the flex industry. So I will hand over to Anastasia. If you've got any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat box, but we'll pick them all up at the end when she's finished going through the slides. So I shall get your presentation up on screen and leave you to it.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. And hi, everyone. So I've seen quite a lot of familiar names join, but also lots of people that I haven't met yet. So I'll just do a quick introduction about me and then we'll get started. So my name's Anna, so I work at TRC as the Partnerships and Growth Manager. So my role focuses on building partnerships with flex providers and their service providers across the whole of the UK to help strengthen their teams. So I guess what's interesting about my role now is that I get to see hundreds of career journeys across the whole industry, which gives a really unique perspective on what helps people progress and what organisations can do to help retain great teams. So before we get into the topic today, I wanted to start with a story of something that I've seen many times in this industry. So almost 10 years ago, I met a primary school teacher who moved to Australia and took a reception job in the serviced office. Completely new to the industry, and that job was always meant to be temporary, just something to do whilst travelling. But it turns out they were great with members, really proactive with events, and naturally good at creating a community. Within a year, they had progressed to an events role across multiple locations, and the following year into business development across the whole of Australia. So looking back, what was interesting is that it wasn't about ability, it was about mindset and also a good manager's belief in them. That manager has helped them to see that their role wasn't just working on reception, but they saw it as learning how the entire business worked. So they asked questions about occupancy, sales, operations, member retention, everything. And that curiosity is something that we see again and again in people who do build really successful careers in flex. So in case you hadn't guessed, that primary school teacher was actually me. And so now, almost 10 years on, after returning to the UK, I continued my career in flex. I've worked for providers like BizSpace, but also independent operators where the role was very hands-on, do everything in the business from marketing, all of the sales, accounts, even AMLCC checks. So if you've ever worked for a small provider, you'll understand what I'm talking about, how it's wear many hats. And so this led me to studying a master's degree in Positive Organisational Psychology and turning my focus to where I am today, to the fabulous people side of flex. So that's a little intro about me. So now we'll get on to one of the main problems that we seem to experience in flex. So at TRC, we've recently been conducting some research into the retention of front of house, and this one statistic really stood out to us. So over 70% of front of house professionals don't currently see their role in flex as a long-term career. That's the majority of front of house. That's a huge number that are not seeing this job as a long-term career. So across the industry, we consistently see high turnover in community and operations roles, exceptional talent leaving the industry entirely, and career pathways that are often unclear. So I'd say the biggest challenge we see in this industry isn't hiring, it's turning the roles into careers. But this is what I just mentioned about my own story, how at first I didn't see how this could be a career for me, but here I am 10 years on and I have turned it into a career. So today on the webinar, we have a mix of both front of house employees who are looking to turn their role into a career. And we also have a lot of senior management attendees. So most of what I'm going to talk about can be applied on both sides. So in Flex, your workspace doesn't just win on its product alone. It wins on the experience delivered by the people inside the building every day. It's the way your members are welcomed. It's the way issues are solved. It's the way communities are built. So that's really important to remember, because it means two things. It means for organisations, having a great team is a huge competitive advantage. Your buildings can be replicated, your design can be copied, but that exceptional team is something that is really difficult to replicate. But it also means something very powerful for individuals in this industry. It means for people who truly understand the impact that they have and how their role can directly have on the company, they're the ones that go on to build incredible careers in Flex. So it's really important to remember that the Flex industry is built on its people, and you are the most important part of it. So something that I find really exciting about the industry is just how quickly careers can grow. So we've seen people start on reception and within 5 or 6 years become regional managers or directors, but that progression usually comes down to a mindset shift. So people who treat the role as a job, that means it's more about focusing on completing tasks that are assigned to them. They're just getting through the day-to-day of whatever they're asked to do. And that is great, but the people who build careers whilst they're doing that are focusing on the skills that they're learning. So if you'd like to progress in sales, for example, what skills could you be learning in your current role that could support that? And a key part of having the career mindset is about focusing on increasing your impact on the business and showing an understanding of how your role can impact others. So for leaders in the room, one of the biggest drivers of retention is helping your teams to see that pathway. So when people believe that they're building a career rather than just doing a job, they stay longer and they perform better. I'll leave that up for a moment just so you can read through it. So what is interesting from our research is that people rarely leave because they dislike the work itself. The biggest factor was actually a lack of career progression visibility. So it means they enjoy the work, but 74% don't know what the next step looks like. So the second factor that we found was pay not keeping pace with responsibilities. So this is very common in fast-growing industries like Flex, where roles evolve quickly. But however, as we just discussed, for individuals who want to build a career, the fastest progression often comes from focusing not on what the role pays today, but on the skills and the commercial exposure that the role provides you. So it's going back to that mindset. What is this role giving me that can help me develop in my career? So in order to progress, it's about treating each role as a platform to build capability. But at the same time, for leaders in the room, this does highlight the importance of clear progression pathways and a fair recognition as responsibilities grow. And the third most common reason for people considering leaving is a lack of management support, particularly around their development. So from this, we can see that when both sides are aligned, so individuals are thinking about their growth and leaders are supporting that development, then retention improves dramatically. So in more traditional industries, it can take years to move up between levels. But in Flex, because businesses are growing really quickly and teams are often very lean, people who demonstrate the right behaviours can progress really quickly. But it's important to understand that progression rarely happens by accident. You have to intentionally want to progress and you have to work towards that. So we find the ones that build careers in the industry tend to do 3 things particularly well. And this is what we'll touch upon, all 3 of these things today. So first, they understand their strengths and how to use them in their role. Second, they start thinking about the commercial side of the business, how occupancy, retention and revenue work. And thirdly, they're intentional about their development. So like we talked about before, not just waiting for it to happen to them, but actively going out and building the skills required for the next step. And so interestingly, these are the same things that leaders can focus on to help develop and retain great teams. So let's start with the first one, strengths, because this is where high-performing teams and individuals really begin to differentiate themselves. So this is one of my real passions. And so this is one of the lenses that I think is quite unique that I can bring to this conversation, because it's from Positive Organisational Psychology, which is basically all about how people and organisations thrive. So traditionally, performance management has focused on fixing weaknesses. But in positive organisational psychology, the research consistently shows something different. So people tend to perform at their best when they're able to use their core strengths regularly in their work. So when individuals understand their strengths, they feel more energised, more engaged, and ultimately perform better. And for leaders, understanding the strengths within your team is incredibly powerful when it comes to development and retention. So what are character strengths? So character strengths are essentially the qualities that come naturally to us. So the things that we do well and the things that energise us rather than drain us. So there are a few different strengths models out there. I prefer the VIA character strengths, and I will share the link so you can see more about this at the end of the presentation. But the VIA character strengths aren't skills that you've learnt in your job. They're your natural behaviours. So the things that maybe your family and friends might say they love about you the most. And to understand your character strengths, you can do a simple online test. It's free. And it will just identify your top strengths. And like I said, I'll put that link in the chat afterwards. So research consistently shows that the people that use their strengths regularly at work, 3 things tend to happen. So the engagement increases, performance improves, and your overall well-being improves. I mean, if you think about it, it feels so much better to be focusing on things that you're doing well rather than looking at things that you're not very good at. And this is why strengths-based approaches are increasingly being used in leadership development. So hopefully you can all see this. So hopefully it might be a little bit small, but hopefully you can see at the top the titles of the 24 different strengths. So I want to take a moment to reflect on it. So if you're working in a front of house or community role, have a little read, choose your top 3 strengths that you feel shine most outside of work. So are you naturally curious about people? Do you bring energy to social environments? Do you enjoy solving problems? And for those leading teams, think about your team as a whole. What strengths do you consistently see across your people? And if you've got a pen and paper, take a moment to write these 3 strengths down. Now, I can't see anybody, so I can't see if people are done or not. But if you are done, just have a think. Are your strengths actually being used in the way that you work? Or are they being promoted in the way that your team works? Okay, so now we're going to relate it directly to Flex. So when we look at high-performing teams across the Flex sector, certain strengths tend to appear again and again. So for community managers and member experience roles, we often find that they rely heavily on social intelligence, kindness, and curiosity. Operations leaders often demonstrate strengths like judgment and leadership, and commercial roles often rely on creativity, perseverance, and strong social awareness. So when people understand their strengths, they can start to design how to approach their role around them. And leaders can begin developing people based on what they naturally do best. So I'll give you some practical ways that you could use your strengths, especially during challenging moments. So I always say, instead of reacting instinctively, just pause and ask yourself, which of my core strengths could I apply here to solve this? For example, if it's a member's complaint, if one of your strengths is social intelligence, it can help by understanding the emotion behind the complaint and responding with empathy before trying to solve the problem. Or if you're in a sales role and you're experiencing a really slow sales period, to try and approach it differently, you could apply your natural strength of creativity to think of and try new approaches rather than just accepting, oh, it's a slow period. You could think outside the box. So it's about pulling your strengths in and thinking, hold on, how can I solve this problem using my strengths? And strengths really become powerful when we use them intentionally. And so using the strengths approach, it can also change how organisations think about hiring. So instead of only asking whether someone's done the job before, you can start to frame the conversation in a way to see whether they've got the strengths that predict the success in that environment. And as we talked about before, for example, strong community managers, they often demonstrate curiosity about people, energy in social environments, and a proactive approach to problem solving. So when you're interviewing someone, you intentionally ask questions that allow you to find out someone's natural strengths. And additionally, when looking at your team as a whole, if you identify all of the strengths that are relevant for the specific role that you're hiring for, look at your team as a whole and see if any of those strengths are missing from your current team, and then hiring to fill those gaps so you have a well-rounded team. So for individuals, your strengths can be your career advantage if you apply them well. And so my advice with this is to really understand your natural strengths, apply them consistently in your role, and use them to create impact, which we'll move on to in a moment. So the last thing I'll say on strengths is that strengths really create positive emotions, and then that positive emotion creates performance, and then that performance creates opportunity to grow and thrive. So this is probably the biggest accelerator in building a career. It's becoming commercially aware. And surprisingly to some, it is possible to learn this right from the start of your career in front of house. So it's about beginning to understand how your role contributes to the performance of the centre. For example, a community manager isn't just hosting events, they're influencing member retention, which is encouraging members to stay with you. Front of house teams aren't just greeting members, you're shaping the entire member experience, which directly affects their renewal decisions. And understanding things like occupancy levels, which days are busiest in your space, meeting room utilisation, which rooms are used the most, which have the opportunity to be used a lot more. And most importantly, like those upsell opportunities. For example, offering catering services during a lunchtime meeting. Really important, noticing if one of your members' teams they're interviewing and so they're growing, then you could pass it on to sales and they could suggest a bigger office. So if you're consistently supporting the sales team with upselling, then it's inevitable that you're probably going to end up progressing into that role in time. So for managers, it's about helping your team to understand these commercial drivers. Can you expose them to a little bit more about the business? Because it's powerful for the performance of your building as well. So once people understand how their role contributes to revenue, they can start demonstrating their impact in a completely different way. So once you understand how your role connects to revenue, the next step is learning how to demonstrate your impact. So one of the most common things I used to hear in career conversations is, I've worked really hard this year. But those conversations tend to change dramatically, both from the outcome and your confidence when you're going into those conversations, when you start to talk about the outcomes that you've created. So I've put here a framework that we always suggest for these conversations. It's a simple 3-step structure called the IGA: impact, growth, ambition. So first, talk about your impact. What have you delivered this year? Second, talk about your growth, the skills you've developed, how you've improved. And thirdly, talk about your ambition. Where would you like to go next? So this approach shows ownership of your career whilst also helping your managers to see your future potential. So can you see how that's very different from I've worked really hard this year, because it's helping to clearly demonstrate the value that you bring. And again, for leaders, it's about creating opportunities for your teams to understand these metrics, to start talking in terms of occupancy and meeting room use and member retention. It's about supporting them to understand the business behind it. So when I was operator side, I used to start this by having my reception team fill in sections of my monthly report that directly related to their roles. So things like additional services, things like additional services. So how many were sold this month, how many cancelled subscriptions. So I could have pulled that data from their online platform myself, but I felt there was a real value in asking them to reflect on it. And I also asked my team to look over the monthly invoices every month before they went out for their members at their site. So that often triggered them remembering a building pass they'd forgotten to on charge, and just understanding the impact of what they do at front of house. And also when I started in my own early career, I used to keep a basic spreadsheet and just recorded anything important that I felt like I'd done. So every time I sold a large catering order, I'd write it down. So at the end of the 6 months, I could see I'd sold £5,000 in catering, which that data then changed my conversations from being just about my effort to being about the impact that I'd have on the business. So TRC have created a retention model, and this is the sort of information we share exclusively with the operators that we're partnered with. And so across the operators that we do work with, we've seen a pattern in those that retain great people. So here it is. It's just a recap of everything we've covered. So firstly, they recognise the strengths within their teams and they build their roles around them. Secondly, they give teams visibility into the commercial side of the business, occupancy, revenue, retention, so people understand how their work contributes to performance. And then at the top, they create clear progression pathways so people can see the next step in their career. They invest in the development and giving people opportunities to build the skills they're needed for that next step. So when all of these three things are present, people can really see themselves growing within the organisation, and then their mindset shifts from a job mindset to a career mindset. So I always say the most successful operators in this industry aren't just building great spaces, they're building future leaders. And some examples that operators that we work with, what they're implementing, so quarterly development conversations, strengths-based feedback, and shadowing opportunities across sites. So these small steps, they help build career pathways instead of just roles. Okay, so I hope that's been useful today. It's a very short snapshot. So if the topic resonates and you'd like to continue the conversation around strengths-based leadership or retention, I'm always happy to connect. I've left some time at the end so we can do some questions. But at TRC, we work across the entire UK flexible workspace industry. So we see a lot of these career journeys and organisational challenges, and we're passionate about helping operators develop careers, not just fill roles. So I've also shared a snippet today of what's contained in our retention report 2026, which is due to be released by the end of the month. So please do let me know if you'd like a copy sent to you by email, and I'll be happy to forward it on. My email is at the bottom here, Anna with one N at trclondon.co.uk. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Anastasia. That was a lot of very useful, practical information packed in, I think, for everybody. So yes, as you say, we have got a few minutes if anybody has any questions that they'd like to add in. I think you're happy that we share the slides afterwards with people as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll send those out. We always share the recording as well in case anyone wants to catch up on anything or share it with colleagues. So maybe just as a couple of questions from me. If there was one that you include a lot of good advice, but if there was one quick thing that managers could do to improve retention straight away, what would you advise?
I would say visibility. So people don't necessarily need an immediate promotion, but they just need to see what that next step looks like. So the operators who tend to do this well, they just make progression very clear. So they show how someone might move from front of house into community management, then operations, and and then regional roles. It's about showing them what they need to do to achieve that next step.
Just bring us back on screen. Yeah. Hopefully everyone's got your details, but as I say, we will share the presentation afterwards. And for people that are in roles and they're thinking, oh, there's not opportunities for them to use their strengths in their current role, what would you say to them?
Good question. So if that's the case, you're probably looking at the strengths from the wrong perspective. So it's about how can you solve problems by using your strengths. So I would say talk to management and say, look, these are my key strengths. I would like to use them more in my role. And together you might be able to find ways to use them. But it's also about thinking creatively. So it might be that you're hosting community events, and you might say, right, what can I do differently using my strengths, which then sparks off ideas, and it makes you think about the whole role in a completely different way. And then you get that enjoyment out of it because you're doing something, you're applying something you love whilst you're working. So does that answer the question?
Yes. Yeah. And I think one of the aims of the Flex Generation Initiative is that we set out a bit more what the opportunities that the industry offers, because I think it probably is an industry that people coming out of school or university and looking for jobs probably don't really know a lot about. But it is I'm sure you'd say as well, it is an industry with a lot of opportunities in different ways. There's quite a broad range of jobs as well, aren't there? Can you sort of think maybe there's a few areas that are maybe not so obvious?
Yeah, so it's again, it's about that visibility. It's about understanding all the different opportunities that are open to you. So if you're in a larger organisation, there's back office work as well as front office. If you're in a smaller one, and if you're like me, you just like being on the go constantly, then it might be that a smaller organisation is better for you, where you just do a bit of everything. And so there's so many transferable skills that you're learning. I always say once you've done front of house, you can pretty much go into anything, because you're answering telephones for multiple different businesses. You are watching and learning sales skills. Like the skills that you learn in the flex industry, I don't feel like you would learn such a vast amount anywhere else. So yeah, it's a really exciting industry, and it teaches you a lot. So wherever you go and whatever you do, those skills that you learn in flex can be transferred across.
Yeah, no, it seems that as you say, covers a broad range of things. And at points in my career, I've regretted, oh, why didn't I train to be a lawyer or a teacher or something? Because it feels like the next career step is then a bit more obvious that you progress within that. But I'm now with what is a small organisation doing a wide range of things. So all the many things that I've done in my career in different jobs in very different sizes of organisations have come into play, and being able to use a wide variety of skills. So nothing's wasted, is it, as you have those opportunities at the very early stages as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that I was trying to get across today. It's about having that mindset of the skills that you're learning, rather than just seeing it as a job that you come in and you tick a box and you do whatever your manager's asked you to do for the day, and then you go home. If you want to progress, it is about seeing the skills that you're learning and appreciating it.
Yeah. Well, we're in there. Thank you very much, Anastasia. That's been really useful. So as I say, we'll share the recording so that people can catch up on any bits or share with colleagues. We will be developing more activities through the Flex Generation initiative over the rest of the year. We also have our conference coming up on the 12th of May, which will cover a very broad range of flex-related matters. So thank you, Anastasia, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.